Hey, I'm Brooks from BrooksBrownCoaching.com, and I'm going to be discussing a couple of the many ways that wheat might be harming your health and some of the negative effects that it could be creating that you weren't even aware of. So if you're dealing with something like joint pain or bloating or maybe even anemia, I encourage you to stick around and see what this is all about. So like I said, there's a lot of ways that wheat's harming your health. There's a lot of reasons that I don't eat wheat. I don't recommend it for any of my clients, but I want to focus on two specifically today. There's two things in wheat that we typically refer to as anti-nutrients, and these are lectins and phytates. Now, lectins and phytates are present in a lot of plants, but we're specifically going to focus on the ones in wheat today because they are so prevalent. Now, let's start with the lectins. So wheat germ agglutinin is a lectin in wheat. It is very prevalent in modern wheat. Farmers and the agricultural industry is actually selected for higher levels of lectins in wheat because what lectins do is makes the plant resistant to pests. The way it does that is when a pest eats wheat and eats this lectin, the lectins enter into the digestive system of that animal, totally destroys the digestive system, and then totally destroys the actual mineral makeup of the animal to break down their shell. So they are prevented from, one, absorbing nutrients. They can essentially starve to death, but then their protective shell is weakened. Now, of course, insects are much smaller than us, and so the effects on them are very quickly seen. It's more effective. However, those same negative effects are exerted on human beings, but we are able to handle it for a whole lot longer. And so we don't necessarily attribute what is kind of like poisoning to wheat because it's so prevalent in our diet. So the same way that lectins destroy the intestinal system of an insect, this wheat germ agglutinin will go into your intestines when you eat wheat and start to strip away the epithelial cells that line the inside of your intestines. Now, these epithelial cells are responsible for maintaining what we call tight junctions in the intestines, which make sure that what needs to stay in the intestine stays in the intestine, and what needs to be let through the barrier and into the blood so it can be circulated throughout the body is allowed to do that. This barrier is very selective about what's meant to pass through and what isn't. But this wheat germ agglutinin can start to strip that barrier away and lead to something you might have heard as leaky gut syndrome. So when you start having this leaky gut, what we're having is permeability. So things are able to slip through that barrier and make their way into the blood. We'll come back to that in just a second. But another thing that I mentioned that is happening with the insects is that this wheat germ agglutinin is attaching to a chemical that creates chitin. Now, chitin is what makes up the shell of an insect, their exoskeleton. However, that same chemical that goes on to create chitin is what makes glucosamine in our body. Now, you've probably heard of people, maybe you've seen people talk about taking glucosamine for themselves or maybe even for their animal when they have joint pain to try to help with arthritis or any type of joint pain. Well, that's because glucosamine inside the joint actually helps build your cartilage. Now, cartilage is the protective cover of your joints that makes sure that your joints can move smoothly and without pain. Cartilage doesn't contain any nerve endings, and so we can move, you can run without having the banging impact, let's say in your knee. When you have healthy cartilage, you're not going to have sharp pain there. But as that cartilage begins to erode, now you'll have bone on bone where there are nerve endings, and that can be extremely painful. Now, that same protective layer is on every joint in your body. Well, this chemical in wheat attaches to that glucosamine, which keeps that cartilage from being able to repair. So it binds to that protein because lectins are carbohydrates that bind protein. So they bind that protein, that glucosamine protein, and they don't allow it to repair your cartilage. Additionally, all of that taking place in the joint, when this wheat germ agglutinin shows up and starts to bind to these proteins, your body recognizes it as something foreign. And so you have an immunomodulation where your body starts to try to attack this thing inside the joint, which is going to increase inflammation. So I can tell you one of the very first things that happened for me when I quit eating wheat was a reduction in joint pain. I'm very active. I lift weights. I surf, I bike, I run, I paddleboard, I do all this stuff, play volleyball. I just thought that, joint pain came with the territory. Well, I didn't realize that, I was probably causing all this inflammation, and simply just eliminating wheat created a massive reduction in inflammation for me. So that's one thing you could look forward to if you decide to make this diet modification. But you might be thinking, okay, I'm eating wheat and wheat is going in my stomach. How is that making my knee hurt? Well, back to what I was saying about stripping away of the epithelial cells. When these lectins start to strip away that lining in your stomach, that sort of barrier, what that allows when you develop this leaky gut situation is it allows things in the intestines to leak out into the body and become systemic. So they can go into the blood and go all over the body. Wheat germ agglutinin is one of those things that can do that. So it breaks down that barrier, and now it can get into the rest of the body. It gets outside of the stomach and the intestines and the colon, is now circulating in your blood, where it can find its way to your joints and to your eyes, the other place that glucosamine is really present, the cornea of the eye. So it's not just causing a little upset stomach. You might notice if you have a lot of joint pain that doing something like this could maybe be helpful. And that, maybe that makes a little more sense about how the things you're eating are affecting other parts of your body. Now, additionally, from a digestive standpoint, another thing that's happening, not only if we're stripping away those epithelial cells and stripping away that barrier is helping us digest food and let things in that need to be going in and keep things out that need to stay out, like I said. Well, that's affecting the way that we're absorbing healthy nutrients as well. On top of that, wheat germ agglutinin blocks something called cholecystokinin, which is essentially a hormone response that's telling your gallbladder to produce bile and digestive enzymes. Now, enzymes are things that our body requires to break down food, fat, carbohydrates, protein. We need different types of enzymes to break those things down so our body can then utilize it. It's not as simple as just, it goes into the stomach acid and then dissolves and then your body takes what it needs. It's not that. If the enzymes that it needs are not present, it won't be able to break it down. So, for instance, if we look at protein, the enzymes that are going to break down protein are in a class called protease. So if you see ASE on the end of a word, when we're talking about things like this, it's probably going to be an enzyme, lipase, for instance, something that's going to break down lipids, fat. Well, this wheat germ agglutinin is going to block those enzymes from being produced. Not only can it block them from being produced, but the fact that wheat germ agglutinin is a charged molecule means that it can bind to enzymes that do make it through, that are produced. So let's say, for instance, you're someone who's trying to increase muscle mass or lose weight, so you're eating a lot of protein, and then on top of that, you're eating some healthy whole grains. Well, those grains that wheat germ agglutinin is binding to the enzymes in your body and also keeping this bile and keeping the enzymes from being produced to break that protein down. So you're not even getting all the protein that you're eating because these lectins that are in the way are preventing this absorption that you need. So that's also a huge problem. Additionally, if we get away from the lectins for a minute and we talk about phytates. So phytates are another protective chemical in the plant that is protecting them from predators and pests. And again, most of these predators and pests learn their lesson. They get sick or they die and they quit eating the thing that's poisoning them. But unfortunately, humans haven't figured that out. So let's talk about phytates. So in wheat, a phytate, it's essentially a form of phosphorus. Again, phytates are in a lot of other plants, but we'll talk about the one specifically here for wheat. So the phytates in wheat, it's a positively charged, it can bind to positively charged minerals. So the most common positively charged minerals we're going to think of are going to be iron, zinc, magnesium, manganese, and calcium. So again, these are things that are critical for the functioning of your body, for your immune system, for hormone regulation, all these things. Well, these healthy whole grains you're eating are literally preventing your body from being able to absorb the necessary nutrients you need. And we can kind of quantify by what amount. So let's see here. 100 grams of whole wheat contains 800 milligrams of phytates. So 100 grams of whole wheat, to give you an idea, that's about 3.5 ounces. Not a whole lot. So 800 milligrams of phytates in that 100 grams of whole wheat. Well, 50 milligrams of phytates reduce iron absorption by 80 to 90%. 80 to 90%. Are you anemic? Do you eat wheat? Could this be why? 80 to 90% of your absorption of iron from 50 milligrams of phytates. So if we break that down, that's what, 16? You're talking about less than 10 grams of wheat. I mean, you're eating a piece of bread. You're going to be well over that 50 milligrams of phytates. So blocking that type of iron absorption to that level is hugely detrimental, particularly for women. Guys don't tend to struggle with anemia as much as women do, but this is a huge contributing factor. Blocking 80, 90% of your iron absorption from eating 50 milligrams of phytates in wheat, healthy, quote, healthy whole grains. Zinc, 35 to 45% of people, elderly people now are deficient in zinc, but worldwide the thought is about 2 billion people. Now we're looking at we're creeping up on 8 billion people in the world, but we're talking about 2 billion people are deficient in zinc, something as critical as, keeping up your skin integrity and your immune system, your hair growth, your hormone regulation. Well, zinc, your absorption of zinc is blocked by phytates, by eating wheat. That should be a significant motivator to get away from this stuff. Magnesium absorption is reduced by 60% in the presence of phytates. So if that food is in your system, your magnesium absorption is going to be reduced by 60%. Now, magnesium, we often think of it, you take magnesium for sleep, or maybe you take magnesium as, some people are taking it as a laxative. Additionally, magnesium controls things like your blood pressure and your heart rhythm. So it's not just a supplement. Sometimes we hear these words and think, oh, this is something you take for your health. No. If you don't have magnesium to help regulate your electrolytes, you will die. So magnesium deficiency can be very serious. And if we're talking about 60% reduction in absorption just by the presence of phytate foods, okay. Additionally, phytates bind to calcium. So they will bind to this in your intestines and prevent you from, one, absorbing it. So once that calcium is bound up, it can't be used. It's just going to end up being excreted. And additionally, there's a protein in wheat called gliadin or gliadin, depending on who you hear say it, that also increases calcium loss through urination. So if you are someone who is maybe dealing with limited bone density, or as you age, you are worried about osteoporosis or osteopenia, or even just fractures, whatever it is, eating wheat is blocking your calcium, blocking your magnesium, which is going to be important in bone development. Additionally, it's damaging your cartilage, which is going to lend itself to osteoarthritis and joint pain, which typically then leads to a reduction in activity, which then can lead to osteoporosis. So all of this stuff together, it's getting harder and harder to find the benefits here. Like I said, there are a lot of reasons to stay away from this stuff. But if we just focused on the wheat germ agglutinin and the phytates alone, that should be pretty motivating to try to start looking for other ways to get around this. Now, some people try to focus on, maybe if we eat an older version of wheat that the prevalence wasn't as high, like maybe emmer or einkorn. These are think of like ancient grain wheats. They still contain these lectins and phytates. However, now it's something about 3 times as high because, again, the agricultural industry has selected for this because it makes it more resistant to bugs. It's kind of like a built-in pesticide. Well, if it kills the bugs, it's clearly this stuff is hurting us too for these reasons. So it's just something to consider. Really consider the labels that you hear of healthy whole grain. Think about who's telling you that it's healthy. Is that marketing? Definitely is marketing. And how can we say something, we see a lot of stuff about heart healthy whole grains. Well, how are we saying something's heart healthy if it's, even if we just look at magnesium, if it's just blocking the absorption of magnesium in your body that we know is so critical for blood pressure and, heart regulation, how can it be healthy? So think about it. Look this stuff up, or ask me if you have questions that I can explain more. There's, tons and tons of information about this. And I'll tell you, there's a guy, Dr. William Davis, that I would highly recommend if this topic interests you. He wrote a book called Wheat Belly. He also wrote a book called Super Gut, where he gets further into the gut microbiome, which I think is probably the future of health. That's something that I really focus on now. And wheat is an incredible disruptor of your microbiome and can lead to really serious dysbiosis, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Because additionally on the things we're talking about here, if it's really disrupting that absorption of food in your body and it's blocking the bile and blocking the enzymes, it means that food's not breaking down. And that means that food is sitting in your gut and that food is fermenting and it is rotting, which is producing gas. Not, people, the vegans and the vegetarians of the world say things like meat sits in your stomach for however long. No, but if you don't have healthy enzymes and a healthy gallbladder response, you can have, food sit in your gut a lot longer than it should, which is going to produce some really negative effects for you. Diarrhea, constipation, bloating, all that bad stuff. Changes in bowel movements that are really prevalent when people are eating a lot of wheat. You might notice, we don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole here, but you might notice if you eat a lot of wheat, you eat a lot of grain, that your bowel movements might become much lighter in color. That is because your body is not able to absorb the fat that it needs out of your food because your gallbladder is being blocked and the bile that should be released in your stomach is not there to break down the fat. And remember, again, that fat is very critical for your health. You have to have dietary fat. And so if you're eating a lot of wheat, eating a lot of grain, your body's not able to absorb that. So another check in the don't eat wheat column. I will say it's getting much easier to go without wheat. There's a lot of better food options out there. I recommend eating for nutrient density, which means you're going to exclude things like bread or, just simple grain anyway. Really opting for more meat, vegetables, some fruit, and then none of the filler stuff. But, if you got to have it, there's some good alternatives now, some gluten-free alternatives that don't contain all this wheat. So hope you learned something. I hope this was helpful. And, maybe you can start to look at, I would recommend just if you can take 10 days off, no wheat, and look at your labels, look at your food labels and realize how much wheat is in stuff. Everything, things that you wouldn't expect, that you're still getting this wheat, germ, and gluten. So see if you can get totally away from it for 7 to 10 days. And just go, how do I feel? Do my joints feel better? Is my stomach flatter? Any of that stuff. So anyway, I appreciate you watching. If I can help you out, please like, comment, subscribe. Go to my website, brooksbrowncoaching.com. You can find me on Instagram too at brooksbrowncoaching. Hope to talk to you again soon.